welcome, and I appreciate that everybody's interested in learning about this serious and somewhat obtuse topic, which is hydrogen blending. Hydrogen blending is related to two other topics it intersects with, and yet those three topics are somewhat different. There is the world of hydrogen as a fuel. There is the world of hydrogen blending being provided by utilities that want to blend hydrogen with the methane they deliver to our homes via pipelines. And then there was the world of carbon capture, usage, and sequestration. All those overlap, and they're all different worlds.
The world of the hydrogen bomb.
Yes, hydrogen as a weapon. There's that one too. So welcome everybody. Can you give me another report, Kenise, on our status about how many people are on with us?
Yes, currently we have 18 registrants.
18. Okay, well, I'll get started and people will probably continue to join us, but hello everybody and welcome to our hydrogen blending webinar, hydrogen blending action webinar with our presenter, Barb Gottlieb, our national expert, who is the program director for environment and health at PSR National. There are a few immediate issues that we're dealing with hydrogen blending. We gave a webinar in April as the legislative session was entering its last month. And we talked about some pro-hydrogen legislation that ended up passing, unfortunately, in the state legislature. And we'll get into more detail about that. But so that is done. In the meantime, we also have Xcel going public with its hydrogen blending demonstration project for Hudson, Colorado. 250 homes are supposed to begin receiving hydrogen blends by the end of the year. Meanwhile, what permitting processes will control that? What regulators will regulate that? A lot is up for grabs right now. We're talking to the PUC. We're going to be talking to Adams County officials in an effort to make them aware of the hazards that could accompany this plan for their demonstration project. In addition to that, Xcel has submitted its clean heat plan as of August 1st, and that clean heat plan makes references to hydrogen blending as one of their solutions to reduce GHG emissions. It's not a major solution, but it is one of their solutions. And we object to that, of course. So we'll get farther into the weeds about the policies in our states, and I'll be sharing some of the resources in this document here. And I will right now put this resource document in the chat for everyone to reference later. So actually, I don't see a place to put it in the chat. Host and panelists. Well, I'll share it with you one way or another. We'll figure that out. And in the meantime, I'm going to introduce Barb Gottlieb, our National Program Director for Environment and Health, who has written an excellent resource called Hydrogen Pipe Dreams: Why Burning Hydrogen in Buildings is Bad for Climate and Health. And she's here to give you more detail and more updates on this topic. So I'll stop sharing and I'll welcome Barb Gottlieb right now. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Barb Gottlieb, as she was saying, from the National PSR office, and I'll be talking with you today about why PSR thinks that hydrogen is not a solution to anybody's energy problems. Could we put my slides up, please? And by the way, while we're waiting for those slides to come up, let me just add that if I'm an expert on hydrogen, that's a very relative term. I suspect there's some people on this call, on this webinar today, who know at least as much as I do. Certainly PSR Colorado's own Harv Teitelbaum is, I'd say, an expert and with greater standing than myself, as is my co-author on the report that Lauren referenced, Andy Krasner. Still waiting for those slides to come up?
Yes, I have it here. I'm just trying to pull it up 1 second.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll just give this is my my very gracious colleague, Kenise Faho, who's giving up her evening tonight to give us a hand with the technologies here. Y'all should be grateful it's not me trying to share my slides and talk at the same time.
I also want to encourage everybody to withhold your questions till the end, and you can all put them in the Q&A anytime that you would like, and we'll refer to them after the presentation. Thank you.
Well, while we're waiting for those slides to come up, let me just give one very, very general framing remark to remind us why we're here tonight. I'm going to be talking about hydrogen, but the larger issue that we're talking about is our energy system and its implications for the climate and for our health. Whenever we talk about energy, we are by implication talking about climate change and the life and death threat that we now face to slow the advance of climate change. We're still waiting for those slides.
Following that, we are also talking about the health impacts that go with the pollutants that also cause climate change. And we're well aware of many of them, and some are more subtle. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the details about hydrogen, how hydrogen affects both our health and our climate.
Well, as you all in Colorado know, hydrogen is being pushed by utility companies and by the US government. It's being hyped as the fuel of the future. They tell us that it will help to free ourselves, it'll help to free us from fossil fuels. But as you will learn today, 99% of the time in regard to hydrogen, and that I use that number deliberately, that is not the case. Here we go. Okay. So can we get that a little bit larger? Is that possible?
Full screen.
I think full screen would be just the thing. That's great, thank you. We can move on to the next slide. We'll skip that slide, let's move on. Next slide, please. Okay, well, this is what I was just saying. That hydrogen is being touted as the energy of the future. And it's getting a lot of funding thanks to subsidies that are paid for by you and me, by the taxpayers. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, so-called green hydrogen plants this year can receive a substantial production tax credit up to $3 per kilogram of hydrogen produced for their first 10 years of operation. That's pretty darn generous. The Department of Energy is also offering the states $8 billion, that's billion with a B, to construct hydrogen hubs. They're intended to be the first step towards the creation of a national network of hydrogen producers to facilitate the emergence of a hydrogen economy. And hydrogen may be coming to your kitchen in the form of a hydrogen blending. You might want to be skeptical. You might want to be worried. But here's the thing, hydrogen can be really hard to explain to people, partly because it's really necessary for people to understand where it comes from, and partly because hydrogen's harms to health and the climate occur primarily, not entirely, but primarily not at the point of combustion. And I think most of us are accustomed in thinking about fuels to look at the point of combustion. Next slide, please. So to start with where hydrogen comes from, hydrogen is the most common element in the universe. It's that immense blue cloud in the photo, which I think comes from the James Webb Space Telescope. But that's not the case on Earth. Here on Earth, hydrogen almost doesn't exist in pure form. Instead, here on Earth, almost all hydrogen is bonded with other elements. And some of these are really familiar substances like good old H2O, water. Another molecule where we find hydrogen is methane, whose chemical formula is CH4, hydrogen bonded with carbon. So methane is, as you know, fracked gas, which is a fossil fuel and a major accelerator of climate change. To be able to use hydrogen, then, we have to split apart the molecules where it has bonded. Most of that does consist of splitting methane molecules. So what this means is that In most cases, using hydrogen generally serves to perpetuate the demand for fossil fuels and our dependence on those fossil fuels. It is not a pathway to a cooler or safer, stabilized climate. Next slide, please. If you remember only one thing from my whole presentation, hang on to this number. About 99% of the hydrogen used in the United States is derived from fossil fuels. Most of that is methane, some of it is coal. But whether it's from gas or coal, the use of hydrogen means increasing, not decreasing our demand for these fossil fuels. More mining, more fracking, and more acceleration of dangerous climate change. Next slide, please. When we specify the source of the hydrogen being used, we usually refer to that hydrogen by colors. The colors don't have any real meaning. They're just labels. The hydrogen that we end up is all the same hydrogen, but what we're talking about is how it's produced. Three common types of hydrogen, what so-called brown, so-called gray, and so-called blue, are all derived from fossil fuels. What they call green hydrogen is produced using renewable energy to break down water, so that's very different. So I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about each of these sources of hydrogen. Next slide, please. Brown hydrogen is produced from coal using processes such as coal gasification, where the coal is actually superheated into a gas. This extraction process produces large quantities of carbon emissions that are, obviously released into the atmosphere. Every ton of hydrogen gas from this process emits 10 to 12 tons of CO2. Obvious implications for the climate. That's why PSR finds brown hydrogen to be unacceptable for health, for environment, and for the climate. Next slide, please. Hydrogen that's made from methane is referred to as gray hydrogen. It's made from a process referred to as steam methane reformation. As the name suggests, it uses steam to break down the methane. Well, generating the steam requires a lot of heat, so it's a pretty inefficient use of energy. Furthermore, this gray hydrogen releases greenhouse gases. That's from two sources. First, of course, from the methane, from which the gray hydrogen is produced. Methane is a highly potent greenhouse gas. It's 83 times as potent as CO2 at trapping heat over its first 20 years in the atmosphere. And unfortunately, methane leaks into the atmosphere along its entire supply chain, from the well site where it's extracted, from infrastructure like compressor stations, from pipelines, and from distribution lines. Then the other thing is that one of the byproducts of making gray hydrogen is carbon dioxide, another greenhouse gas. So gray hydrogen accelerates the climate crisis in two ways and perpetuates our dependence on methane. Next slide, please. Blue hydrogen. So blue hydrogen is industry's new darling. It's really nothing more than gray hydrogen. Hydrogen, as I said, derived from methane, with the addition of carbon capture and sequestration, or CCS. CCS is a heavy technology that's used in various industries, coal-burning power plants, cement, chemical plants, and others, to do something, that sounds actually pretty cool, right? It captures the carbon dioxide that is released before it disperses into the atmosphere. This carbon dioxide, once it's captured, is super compressed into a liquid, piped to an underground storage facility, and kept there forever. Good luck with forever, right? There are so many problems with CCS, and to understand what they are and why that means that this blue hydrogen is really unacceptable, you really have to be familiar with the nature of carbon capture. So hang on to your hats. I'm going to give you a crash course in CCS. It really should be a separate webinar. It's going to be a little fast, okay? But let's start kind of at the end with the capture rate. So CCS is touted as capturing approximately 90% of the CO2 that's generated. Wouldn't that be great? But in practice, in the field, CCS technologies capture about 50 to 65% of the CO2. That means that between a third and a half of the CO2 being generated is not being captured. It's going into the atmosphere. It's contributing to climate change. In other words, CCS is not really doing the job it's touted for. Secondly, every industrial facility that uses CCS, needs to ship its CO2 somewhere. Most of this happens by pipeline. A fairly recent Department of Energy report came out in April of this year, said that 30,000 to 96,000 miles of pipeline could be required to get to net zero goals for all that CO2. That would be by 2050. So up to 96,000 miles of pipeline by 2050, that compares to about the 5,000 miles of pipeline now transporting CO2 in the United States. This huge expansion of new pipelines could have tremendous environmental problems, similar to those we've seen for every other kind of pipeline. Damage to forests, damage to farmland, damage to habitat, erosion, siltation of streams and other waterways. And then another problem is that pipelines can and do rupture. And these ruptures actually are made more likely by extreme weather, erosion, vehicles driving over them. And if a pipeline that's carrying this highly condensed CO2 were to rupture, it creates a terrible risk to health in the form of concentrated clouds of CO2. Okay, CO2 is a substance that we exhale when we breathe, right? But in concentrated forms, it's an asphyxiant. It forms heavy clouds that hug the ground and would, in the case of a rupture, displace oxygen to such an extent that anybody who's caught in that cloud could be asphyxiated to death. In addition, CO2, when it's in contact with water, causes acidification. Think about the acidification of our oceans. If somebody were to inhale significant quantities of CO2, they would suffer respiratory acidosis, which is a condition that causes coma and death. This makes CO2 pipeline ruptures extremely dangerous, threatening people who live nearby and also first responders who might be responding to a pipeline break. A few more points on carbon capture and sequestration. Hang in there with me. Excuse me. I mentioned storage forever and ever. The CO2 to be kept out of the atmosphere would have to be stored underground forever. And how many storage areas will last forever? Obviously, none have ever been tested on that timeline. But if the CO2 ever escapes tomorrow or in 100 years, it will drive climate change, completely undoing the whole reason for carbon capture. Here's something that very rarely gets talked about, but we should be aware of. Much of the carbon that is captured through CCS is actually not stored. It's used by the oil industry. They inject it into oil wells to aid in extracting more oil. It's called enhanced oil recovery, or EOR. EOR already accounts for an estimated 5% of total US crude production. So it's clearly a technology that's in the works. What this means is that the CO2 that's derived from processing hydrogen, that's derived from methane, is used to support and sustain the production of yet another fossil fuel, which we need to wean ourselves from if we're going to save ourselves from climate change. It's double jeopardy. And then finally, CCS is just very expensive. Okay, so that's your crash course on CCS. It's an awful lot to try to explain to people. Let's move on to the next slide. So green hydrogen is the one that's being touted as a real solution. Green hydrogen is, let's acknowledge this, it's a zero carbon emissions fuel that's made by breaking down water using, for that process, 100% renewable energy. This would be a great solution for our energy woes if there was enough green hydrogen and if there was enough renewable energy to make it. And in many places, I think perhaps in Colorado, if there was enough water. There is not. Only about 1% of the hydrogen used in the United States now is green hydrogen. And 1%, frankly, that's a negligible amount. And it's not likely to grow substantially in the near future. That's mostly because really, really large amounts of renewable energy are required to make large quantities of green hydrogen. I'll give you just one example. A study was done in Massachusetts recently, estimating that producing enough green hydrogen to provide for 20% of current gas demand would use all of the state's wind energy that is projected through 2030. That would leave exactly none for providing clean electricity from wind energy to Massachusetts homes. So this kind of scarcity greatly limits the availability of green hydrogen, not only now, but actually in the foreseeable future. Also, I mentioned water. In states experiencing drought, there may not be enough water to be able to set aside large quantities to break it down into green hydrogen. Colorado, Arizona, California, and other states, production of green hydrogen might have to compete with water for crop irrigation, for livestock, and for human drinking water. Next slide, please. So let's move now to this question of hydrogen blending. We're now seeing proposals, largely from the utility companies, to mix hydrogen with methane and pipe this mixture into our homes, where we'd burn it in our gas burning appliances, the furnace, the stoves, and others. This is a problem for a number of reasons. I hear that phrase a lot in regard to hydrogen. Most obviously, of course, it increases the demand for methane, both as the source from which the hydrogen is made, but also because the blended mixtures will remain predominantly methane. The mixture between hydrogen and methane can't go much beyond 20% hydrogen by volume. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few slides. So we'd still be burning 80% methane. This locks us into our continuing dependence on this heavy greenhouse gas. But hydrogen blending also presents its own issues. So let's move to the next slide. The first problem I want to reference is, of course, climate change. Blue hydrogen as well as gray hydrogen, which is the same thing minus the CCS, are both made from methane. And then the proposal is to blend that hydrogen with more methane. I've talked about methane's potency as a greenhouse gas. It's really no longer necessary, I think, to remind us of the extreme challenges to health, safety, and life from climate change. Blending hydrogen using green hydrogen is not a solution, and it's not just because of the relative paucity of green hydrogen. Hydrogen has the highest energy content by weight of any of the gas fuels, but it has comparatively low density. That means it requires a greater physical volume to generate the same amount of heat as other fuels. So this difference in density means that when you blend hydrogen with methane, there's not a linear relationship between the change in your methane volume and the amount of reduction you get in greenhouse gases. A 20% blend of hydrogen with 80% methane by volume only reduces your greenhouse gases by at most 6%. So there's not much, I would say bang for the buck, but we don't really want to bang in these cases. Let's move on to the next slide. There are immediate impacts on health. When we add blended hydrogen to gas stoves, we're exacerbating pollution. First of all, let me remind us about hydrogen from methane perpetuating fracking, which potently contaminates air, land, and water, as well as damaging the climate. Blue hydrogen, because it utilizes carbon capture and sequestration, imposes all of the damage associated with extensive pipeline construction and the dangers of ruptures and those potentially fatal clouds of CO2. And then blending hydrogen in your stove compromises your indoor air quality. And most Americans spend, on average, 90% of our times indoors. So this indoor air quality comes from your gas burning stoves, which I think you probably know about thanks to the excellent work of Colorado PSR. Your gas stove exposes you to harmful pollutants, including nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and benzene. Next slide. The blending of hydrogen also creates some somewhat unique safety hazards. Hydrogen, I mean, it's a good fuel because it burns so well, right? Well, it ignites more easily than methane, and it ignites at almost any air to fuel ratio. So leaks are extremely dangerous. There should be no sparks around hydrogen. Electronics, all the electronics in your home should be spark free. Make sure that's the case before you blend with hydrogen. The risk of an explosion increases. In the United Kingdom, a risk assessment study predicted that the number of explosions per year and the risk of injuries from in-home explosions would be 4 times higher with that 20% blend of hydrogen compared to burning methane alone. And unfortunately, methane leaks from appliances when they are in use and when they are turned off. If there's hydrogen blended with that methane, it would make these leaks more dangerous. Hydrogen is very leak-proof. It's the smallest molecule on Earth. Next slide, please. Whenever we look at energy choices, we always have to think about them in terms of their effects on vulnerable populations. In the case of hydrogen production and hydrogen blending, these choices are likely to put already vulnerable populations even further in harm's way. So, of course, there's the continuation of the reliance on methane, which imposes disproportionate harms on low-income communities, communities of color, and indigenous communities. That's true from the production of the methane itself. It's true in regard to the indoor air pollution from stoves. I won't go into all the reasons for that. I think you've probably heard that from PSR Colorado, and if you haven't, you should. But let's just remember that communities of color are more likely to suffer from air pollution-related illnesses like asthma, especially Black children who suffer from asthma at epidemic rates. Low-income households may not have health insurance or access to quality health care. And then all of the other existing health inequities in our whole country and in our culture are magnified by climate change. Next slide, please. Here's another problem with hydrogen blending. The gas stoves, the gas burning appliances in general that we use in the US today were designed to burn methane. Well, when you blend hydrogen into that methane, a lot of things change. The flame speed, the flame temperature both change, and you expand the ignition range of the gas being burned in your home. In practical terms, this means that for safety reasons, all of your gas burning appliances would have to be either modified or replaced if the blend of gas exceeded 20% methane by hydrogen. So imagine that your utility pipes a high volume hydrogen blend into your home. You and your neighbors, of course, because this would all be neighborhood wide. You'd have to replace your gas burning furnace, your stove, your gas burning hot water heater, gas burning clothes dryer, all of those things immediately. This would be pretty darn expensive for most of us. For low-income households, it could create an impossible situation, possibly a crisis that would force them out of their home. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what I'm saying is that expanding fossil hydrogen into homes and businesses, it's not worth the risk to our health, to our family economies, or to environmental justice, or to the climate. Fortunately, we have the technologies that we need to decarbonize our homes. Electrical appliances are a far better option than burning gas and hydrogen. They're safer, they're healthier, they're better for the climate, they're more efficient, and they're increasingly less expensive to power. You've got highly efficient alternatives like heat pumps and induction stoves, and the Inflation Reduction Act provides tax credits and rebates to make the transition more feasible. Next slide, please. Just want to return for a quick second to this question of green hydrogen. Green hydrogen does exist. It does sound promising, but due to its scarcity, it needs to be reserved for sectors that can't be electrified, where you can't bring in your electric alternatives. Hydrogen is currently used in the production of fertilizer and steel, and PSR suspects that it will be necessary to decarbonize heavy industries like cement making, long-distance transport, shipping, and aviation using hydrogen. So we're not entirely opposed at this point in time to the use of hydrogen, but we are very clearly opposed to hydrogen blending. Next slide. You have to watch out as you talk to your legislators, as you talk to your regulators, keep your ear open. Make sure you're not hearing this term, clean hydrogen. This is a term that the oil and gas industry lobby worked hard to create. And unfortunately, they wrote it both into the American Rescue Plan Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Under this designation, both green hydrogen, remember from water and renewable energy, and blue hydrogen are both designated as clean, even though blue hydrogen will drive up greenhouse gases and contribute to all of those environmental problems associated with carbon capture and sequestration. That's why you have to look real closely at all proposals to use hydrogen, including hydrogen burning power plants and hydrogen hubs, to say nothing of your home. Next slide, please. As I said, there is a green path to the future of energy. It requires, first of all, that we slash our use of fossil fuels, leave them in the ground, increase our use of the truly clean, healthy, renewable forms of energy. And then more broadly, we have to make the societal investments that will make it feasible for us to shift our lifestyles. Things like greatly increasing mass transit and active transportation options, so we don't have to rely on cars. As I said, in regard to hydrogen, PSR supports only green hydrogen, insisting that it be reserved for those sectors and processes that can't be powered by electricity. But for heating and cooling our buildings, for cooking our meals, going electric is the way to go. The faster we build out our renewable energy sources, the greener our lives and our buildings will be. So thank you very much. I'll stop here. And Lauren, do you want to open it up to questions?
I thought I would go into the policy document just a little bit first, and then we can go. So I'll talk for just briefly, share my screen and the resources. Did everybody get the link to our resource document? I'll post it again and I'll share my screen. So hang on a second. Okay, so here's our document and I'll put that link in the chat again. I also, if you go to the resource folder, many of these documents are there, and if they're not, I'll be adding more. And that includes the Denver Post article. A lot of people are paywalled at the Denver Post. So the first document that I want to bring your attention to is the Hydrogen Pipe Dreams National Report that Barb Gottlieb wrote with our other excellent expert, Andy Krasner. And this is a great resource, and especially page 5 there's an executive summary, but there's also this more bullet pointed summary here, the 6 failings of hydrogen blending. This is a great resource to share with people, and in the resource folder, I've separated it out so you can share it by itself if you want. Anyway, this is where a lot of our facts are compiled. However, there are updates all the time, and we will be sharing the recording with you all so that you have Barb's updates that she gave today. Next on that resource document, this is our PSR Colorado action page on hydrogen, and we ran an ad campaign in the Denver Post, the Sentinel, the Colorado Sun, and Prairie Media, which includes the Daily Camera in Boulder, directing people with a link to this page. And if you haven't already, you can take action here on both fronts, which is Xcel's hydrogen blending project, as well as the clean heat plan that will include hydrogen blending and many other problems. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But we encourage people to personalize their message, send their message to the Public Utilities Commission, because we want them to get involved. We want them to give the public a chance to have input and take the opportunity to review Xcel's hydrogen blending project before it goes forward. So we're pushing on them for that, more organizing about that. This is preliminary because it addresses both issues, the blending project and the clean heat plan, in a very general way. It may not be long before we do separate action pages on each of those issues in more detail. Next on that resource documents, really important for us all to understand that it's not just us saying that hydrogen is bad for health and bad for the climate. The American Medical Association itself recognizes the health, safety, and climate risk of current methods of producing fossil fuel derived hydrogen and the dangers of adding hydrogen to natural gas. And they encourage their members to take action and communicate with government agencies about these problems for health, problems for climate. Also on this document, I shared a bonus is that they also talk about gas stoves. They passed a resolution on gas stoves, recognizing the dangers to health and climate and encouraging their members to be active and vocal. The next document, it's just something that we're very proud of, and maybe Jan Rose had something to do with this, because Colorado's Coalition for a Livable Climate with 43 member groups and allies, including PSR Colorado and the Sierra Club, have all signed on to the Statement on Emerging Technologies, and there's quite a bit in here about hydrogen that is useful to read and share. So we got at least 45 groups signing onto this document, and you could probably get in touch with CCLC and perhaps sign on to it too. It did receive some news coverage. That's Colorado Citizens for a Livable Climate. Another resource here. These are results of the legislature promoting hydrogen. We tried to inform and advocate against promotion of hydrogen at this stage for a lot of reasons, and I'll get into some of those reasons momentarily, but just a little background on what our state legislators were, did adopt on our behalf, or on the behalf of the industry, or on behalf of the governor. There is a lot of federal money coming in for hydrogen, and it's really hard to resist that. So to the degree that we're going to become a pro-hydrogen state, we want it to be a green hydrogen state. We want that green hydrogen to be used for industries that are hard to decarbonize, hard to electrify, just like Barb said. So, we're all going to come together and work on these kinds of issues on as many fronts as we can. Next, I'm sharing, this is a Colorado Public Radio article or piece, radio piece, but it's also in print here, on the hydrogen blending project and it's just packed with amazing information about the process, about opinions, about the plan, etc. So I highly recommend reading it, sharing it, maybe even getting in touch with Sam Brash and tell him how you feel. Certainly get in touch with your elected officials using our landing page or whatever strategy you normally use to communicate with them. This is Xcel's version of how they see their hydrogen blending project. They give the location. They talk about the details, but you might as well hear it from the horse's mouth how they see it. Now, this is really important. This is something that doesn't come up as much as I believe it should, but the state auditor's office was commissioned by the legislators to audit the gas pipeline safety program of the Public Utilities Commission, and it was a damning report. This is a Denver Post article. Scathing audit finds Colorado failed to properly regulate gas pipelines. Page 62 of this report mentions that Xcel has 1,200, had a big accident in 2018, and since then, 1,200 violations logged with the gas pipeline safety program, very few penalties issued, 1,200 since 2018. I mean, really, they are not doing their job keeping us safe, and neither is the gas pipeline safety program keeping us safe from the current methane gas that we use. There are many violations, there are many explosions, there are even deaths, there are injuries, and the law is not being properly implemented. The regulators not doing their job. Xcel is not doing their job. How can we trust them with hydrogen blending when they can't even keep us safe from the current methane gas that we use in our homes? Hydrogen blending and hydrogen are all about pipelines everywhere, more pipelines all the time. Pipelines fail, pipelines leak, hydrogen leaks even more from those pipelines. People, it's very unsafe to live in a neighborhood with a lot of pipelines. There are so many accidents with pipelines, countless. So do we really want to sign up for more pipelines when we have the alternative of electrifying our homes and using heat pumps to replace our furnaces, using heat pump water heaters to heat our water, and using induction stoves or even traditional electric stoves for cooking? We have a choice. Xcel is supposed to be helping us get off of gas, but they are promoting more ways to use gas. Unfortunately, their clean heat plan includes 3 different kinds of new methane gas for us to use to mitigate supposedly the harms that gas is doing to us. So there's certified natural gas, there is recovered methane gas, and then there's the hydrogen blends and maybe others. And it's relying on these new forms of methane gas to achieve emission reductions, when the real idea is that we are supposed to reduce demand. We're supposed to reduce dependence. We're supposed to have a new life that is all electric, where we are not burning dangerous fossil fuels in our home and breathing the emissions that come from them. That's the vision that I think we all want. If you bring in new forms of methane gas into our system, you are delaying the transition off of fossil fuels. And also you're delaying the transition to a better, healthier life with cooling from heat pumps. Heat pumps provide cooling. We're missing that opportunity entirely if we just continue to rely on new forms of relabeled natural gas. So that's one of the major problems, in addition to the hydrogen that's part of Xcel's clean heat plan. So I just uploaded it for you. You can see it here. And this is, oh, and lastly, but not leastly, for the clean heat plan, Western Resource Advocates has put together a path to pollution-free buildings that meet Xcel's 2030 gas carbonization goals. And that means the clean heat plan can rely on demand side management, can rely on electrification. That means efficiency, weatherization, et cetera, and electrification of homes. There's a pathway here. We don't have to make it up ourselves. Western Resource Advocates did all the good work for us. So thank you very much. I don't know. Yes, thank you, Mira. Thank you, Western Resource Advocates team. I cannot thank you enough for doing this and making it so much easier for us all to advocate for a better clean heat plan. So having said all that, yes, let's open it to questions. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll read off the questions. PSR's take on nuclear power is that we're opposed to nuclear power. And I could go into a lot of detail about that, but it's just too hazardous. The waste, the exposure to radiation, there are proposals, including in legislation, to explore nuclear power small modular reactors. We are opposed to that. We didn't mention that H2, when it leaks into the atmosphere, leads indirectly to more warming. That is correct. This is an important angle. Thank you for sharing that, Jose Luis Jimenez. Very important. So I don't know if everyone can see this link. I'll go ahead and open it. And I'll put it in the chat for you. Thank you very much. Yes. Hydrogen is an indirect source of warming as well. Are there states or cities that, yes, I should have mentioned that. So New Mexico, California, and Oregon all have cities that have rejected hydrogen blending. And Hawaii has a hydrogen blending project. And I want to explore further if there are any violations or accidents in Hawaii. And thank you for the compliment, anonymous attendee. G. Thomas Krauss, hydrogen when burned produces water. Well, yes, that's right. I believe that undesirable products shown in your slide that come from the burning of gas and the gas stove come from the methane. Actually, Barb, are you there? Can you weigh in on the NOx, the elevated NOx that comes from burning hydrogen? Hello?
Yeah, sure, I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm back. Would you mind reading the question again?
Yes. The undesirable products shown in your slide that come from the burning of gas in a gas stove come from methane. I believe that this point should be clarified. Otherwise, we give oil and gas lobby a chance to say we're misrepresenting ourselves, and that makes us less believable and reliable. I know that hydrogen produces at the back end when it's burned fewer greenhouse gases, but it also produces more nitrogen oxides. Can you elaborate on that, Barb?
Well, thank you to the person who pointed that out. I totally agree that we should be very clear that most of the pollution coming from this proposed hydrogen blending is actually coming from the methane. And I think perhaps I went through that a little bit too quickly. We do want to be clear, we do want to be honest, and we don't want to kind of set ourselves up for gratuitous slaps from the industry. So yes, the nitrogen oxides, the carbon monoxide, the benzene, those serious air pollutants that are contributing to indoor air, poor quality and harm to health, those are coming from the methane in your gas stoves. I think the important thing to remind people about with hydrogen blending is that it doesn't get us off of methane. It really makes a fairly minor reduction in the amount of methane. If 80% of the gas that we're still burning is methane, we haven't gotten very far in terms of reducing indoor air pollution, and certainly not in terms of benefits for the climate.
So Barb, can you clarify? My understanding is, and I believe I've seen sources say that the NOx is elevated with the burning of hydrogen. You do not agree with that?
Well, let me get back to you on that. I'm not sure.
Okay, and I will try to get back to you on that as well. Thomas Kraus, thank you for answering, but that is my understanding, whereas it burns cleaner in terms of GHGs, NOx is a factor, and I'll try to get you the stats on that. An elevated factor. Have you thought about incentives to convince Xcel to change direction? Yes, I have. That's a tough haul. The system is built around the pipelines being built, and the economy, yeah, they are dependent on revenue from that. However, they're a profitable company, probably one of the more profitable companies, and I should confirm that, but that's my understanding. So plus they are regulated, they're a monopoly. They should be subject to, regulations that serve the public if they're in exchange for being, the only game in town. But yes, I think there should be more incentives. I think the system, we should take a hard look at the system and the perverse incentives in our system. Absolutely. And I have raised that question in a couple of meetings, and maybe we'll get back to it. Well, I'm sure we will, because I'm not letting go either. Here are some additional resources pointing the point that Luis made about indirect warming. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure to follow up and provide those as well, but I'll paste them into the chat right now. EDF is pro hydrogen, and I think that's disturbing. So I don't know what I'm not saying everybody at EDF is pro hydrogen, or they can't help us do a better job with hydrogen, but or that they don't have good information. But it is frustrating when there are divisions in the environmental community about some of these things. NOx results from the higher flame temperature of the blend, but the blend can be modified to make the temperature the same. Thanks for that clarification. I'll look into it. Feel free to be in touch with me. I'll go back to
wouldn't that modification take the form of reducing the amount of hydrogen?
Do we want to, can we take Randall Shearer off mute, or can you request to be unmuted? Randall, do you want to share something with us? All right, answer that. Oh yeah, so now we have, can you brief us on Colorado's bid to bring a hydrogen hub to the state? Well, it's called the Western Interstate Hydrogen Hub. It's a bid at the national level to bring a hydrogen hub to our state. There would be a regional, New Mexico has also requested this. I don't have a lot of details. I'm not prepared to discuss it at length, but it is a serious question. And I'm happy to say that not only did New Mexico succeed in fighting a hydrogen blending project, but there are organizers in New Mexico who have actually submitted a letter to the US Department of Interior, I believe it is, saying we don't want the hydrogen hub here. And I want to do that in Colorado too. Maybe soon. I hope so. Hope to reach out to others and organize against the hydrogen hub, or to make it at least all green and targeted at those industries that are not easily decarbonized. NOx does increase when burning H2. It's made from N2 and O2 in the air in a flame. Thanks, Jose. Appreciate it. Martin Redder, I suggest that in your messaging, you emphasize that if we siphon off significant amounts of clean energy to produce green hydrogen, the decarbonization of all uses of electricity will impede it. Thank you, Martin. That's an excellent point. I want to say that these decarbonization or this carbon sequestration, these facilities are expensive to build and we need them for other things. So if there's any capacity to build these, it should be used where it's needed and not create more demand for it by producing quote unquote blue or clean hydrogen. I'm 100% with you on that. Do we know why EDF has that opinion? People have a lot of theories about why, and I cannot really say that. You know, if you read about EDF and their philosophy, it may give you some clues. I don't have that right in front of me here, but they're more pro-market than a lot of our organizations are. My understanding is they're more in favor of market-based solutions, but that may not be doing it justice. So maybe I shouldn't have said that, but that's my understanding. The blend can be modified with the addition of nitrogen and interestingly, even carbon dioxide to adjust its enthalpy of combustion. Thank you, Martin. We have always lived in a hydrogen economy. Where do people think sunlight comes from? Right? Well, we're glad that there's hydrogen in the sun. We just don't want it in our kitchens. Thanks, everyone. That's excellent. So is there anybody else who wants to make a comment or ask a question? All good? Okay, I'll stop my share. Thank you for being with us, Barb Gottlieb. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll follow up with you and share the recording, share more information, and take a look at those articles that I have in the resource document. It's really eye-opening. It is so eye-opening. And I have to say, it's discouraging when we've all come to the conclusion that we have to get off fossil fuels. Even the industry itself knows that. And yet, here comes another, strategy to distract us from the goal. And I just hope that all of us will do what we can, spread the word to our networks to make everybody ready to fight back. Thanks for being here tonight. Take care.